Hi, everyone. Social media has emerged as a powerful force in shaping public opinion on geopolitical issues, significantly influencing global politics. This presentation will explore case studies, such as the Arab Spring and climate activism, to highlight how digital platforms drive movements and shape narratives. A particular focus will be placed on YouTube's role in disseminating information and its impact on public discourse. Additionally, we'll address ethical concerns surrounding social media influence and discuss the growing need for regulation to ensure responsible use of these powerful tools. Today's podcast is about social media. Stay tuned and stay safe.
All right, let's ditch the cat videos and food pics for a bit. Today, we're going deep on how social media is actually, shaping global politics. We've got a ton of research and news piled up here, and one thing's for sure, it's not just about likes and shares anymore. We're talking real-world impact on political movements, the rise of platforms like YouTube, and a whole heap of ethical questions that come with this power. Ready to jump in?
Oh, absolutely. It's wild to see how fast social media went from connecting with friends to a tool that can literally shift global events.
So let's break down this whole idea of social media as a movement maker. We've all heard of the Arab Spring, of course, but what's really interesting is how researchers are now looking at its long-term impact. It wasn't just about those initial protests.
Yeah, the Arab Spring really showed everyone how social media could be used to organize on a huge scale, even in places where, traditional protests were basically shut down. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they became kind of like virtual town squares, places where people could share info, gather support, and actually coordinate action.
And it worked, at least for a while. Regimes were toppled, and it seemed like social media had brought in this whole new era of, people power. But, and here's where things get tricky, the research shows that lasting change needs more than just online activism.
Exactly. What happened after those first uprisings is key. A lot of times, the same social media that helped take down dictators was also used to spread, misinformation and just cause chaos. And without strong groups and institutions offline to channel that energy, a lot of those movements struggled to reach their long-term goals.
That's a really important point, isn't it? It reminds us that social media is just a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's not a magic solution for social change, but it can be a really strong catalyst.
I think that's a great way to put it. And we see this happening with other movements too, take climate activism, for example. Platforms like TikTok have been really good at getting the word out about climate change, especially with younger generations.
Oh, totally. Those short, powerful videos, all the viral challenges, it's super engaging. But researchers are now starting to ask, is it actually turning into real action?
That's the big question, right? There's this worry that all this online engagement might just be what some people call slacktivism, where people feel like they're making a difference by liking a post or sharing a video, but they aren't actually changing how they act or getting involved offline.
So how do we move past that slacktivism? How do we make sure that online awareness actually leads to real-world impact?
Well, some studies suggest that the key is to connect online activism with offline chances to get involved. If someone watches a TikTok about climate change, they're more likely to do something if the video also has links to local groups or events where they can actually participate.
So it's about bridging that gap between the online and the physical world, right?
Yeah.
Giving them real ways to take action. And we see this in the Black Lives Matter movement, too. While it gained huge momentum online, with millions using the hashtag to show support and share their experiences, that online activism was also deeply connected to real-world protests, community organizing, and pushing for policy changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that really strikes me about the BLM movement is how social media wasn't just used to raise awareness, but also to actually document police brutality and hold those in power accountable.
Oh, for sure. The ability to film and share videos of these things in real time, it's changed how we understand and respond to, racial injustice. It's given a voice to people who have been ignored and silenced for so long.
But there's a downside to this too, right? Seeing these traumatic images and videos all the time can really affect activists and communities of color.
Yes. Definitely. Studies have shown that being exposed to this kind of content for a long time can lead to secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, and even feeling hopeless. It's really important to recognize this emotional toll and find ways to support activists and communities dealing with this trauma.
It's a reminder that social media has two sides. It can be a powerful force for change, but it can also be a source of pain and trauma.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of how we use these platforms, both personally and as a society. We need to talk about the ethics of social media and how we can use its power for good while minimizing the potential harm it can cause.
And speaking of platforms, let's shift gears a bit and talk about YouTube. It's not just funny cat videos anymore. YouTube has become a major player in how we see global events, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. YouTube has become a place where anyone can create and share their own stories. This has been incredibly empowering for, citizen journalists, activists, and just regular people who want to share their experiences with the world.
It's like having a global megaphone, right? But with that comes a whole new set of problems. How do we make sure things are accurate and stop the spread of misinformation? How do we deal with all the algorithms and echo chambers?
Those are some of the biggest questions we're facing today. And they're questions we'll be diving into more as we continue exploring the world of social media and global politics. One of the things that makes YouTube so interesting is the power of video itself. It's one thing to read about something happening, but it's a whole other thing to see it happening right in front of you. That impact, that feeling, it can be incredibly strong, especially when it comes to shaping public opinion on, complicated global issues.
You're right. A well-made video can make you feel empathy, anger, or even inspire you to act in a way that just text or audio can't always do. And because YouTube is so easy to access, those videos can reach people all over the world really fast.
Exactly. And that's why it's become this crucial battleground for shaping narratives, especially in situations where traditional media is limited or where there are different versions of what's happening.
We saw this during the Arab Spring for sure, with citizen journalists using YouTube to show the protests and the government crackdowns. But it's become even more obvious in recent conflicts, like the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has really shown how YouTube is shaping how the world sees the war. Both sides have been using the platform a lot to spread their own versions of events, often with these really well-made videos that blur the lines between propaganda and actual news.
It's almost like a new kind of information war, isn't it? Where controlling the story is just as important as controlling the actual fighting.
Exactly. And the challenge for people watching is figuring out what's true and what's not, especially when the information is coming from sources they might not know. This is where being able to critically analyze media becomes super important.
So how do we navigate this whole new world of information? How do we teach ourselves and others to be smarter about the information we consume, especially on platforms like YouTube?
Well, one important thing is to look for different perspectives on the same event. Don't just rely on one source, even if it seems trustworthy. Try to find coverage from different places, like international news, independent journalists, and even those citizen journalists who are right there on the ground.
That makes sense. The more viewpoints you have, the better you can form your own opinion.
Exactly. And pay attention to the sources themselves. Who's making this content? What are they trying to achieve? Are they open about where their funding comes from and how they do things? These are all important questions to ask.
It sounds like we need to become a bit like detectives, really digging into the details and figuring out the motivations behind the information we're taking in.
In a way, yeah. And we need to be aware of our own biases. What are our pre-existing ideas about this topic? Are we more likely to believe information that agrees with what we already think? Being aware of our biases can help us be more critical and objective when we're looking at information.
This is all really helpful advice, but I gotta admit, it can feel overwhelming sometimes. With so much information coming at us from every direction, how do we even know where to begin?
It's definitely a challenge, and this is where education and media literacy come in. We need to give people the skills and knowledge to handle this complex world of information.
So it's not just about personal responsibility, it's also about changing the system, right? We need to be teaching these skills in schools, community centers, and even through public awareness campaigns.
Absolutely. And we need to be having conversations about these issues as a society,
Yeah.
talking about the role of social media in our lives, the power it has to shape how we see things, and the responsibility that comes with that power.
It's interesting to think about how social media platforms are responding to these challenges. We've seen some attempts at self-regulation, with platforms like Facebook and Twitter trying to flag or remove misinformation and hate speech. But it's clearly a tough battle.
Yeah, and those attempts have had mixed results. There's a lot of debate about how well these platforms can police themselves and whether they're doing enough to fight the spread of harmful content.
And then there's the whole issue of government regulation, which opens up a whole other set of complications.
Right. There are a lot of things to consider when it comes to regulating social media. On one hand, there's the worry about censorship and governments using regulation to silence dissent or control information.
But on the other hand, we also need to protect people from the harm that can come from misinformation, hate speech, and other kinds of online abuse. It's about finding the right balance.
It really is. And there's no simple answer. Different countries are trying different things, and this discussion is probably going to go on for a while.
One thing that seems clear, though, is that we can't just leave it to the social media companies to regulate themselves. There has to be some level of accountability, whether that's through government regulation, industry standards, or some combination of both.
I agree. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about technology. It's about society, how we use social media, how we consume information, how we talk to each other online. All of these things contribute to the bigger picture of how social media shapes our understanding of the world.
So it's not just about fixing algorithms or making new rules. It's also about changing our own behavior and building a more informed, critical, and responsible online culture.
Exactly. It's about realizing that we all play a part in shaping the future of social media and making sure it's a force for good in the world. One of the things that make YouTube so powerful is just the power of video itself. I mean, it's one thing to read about like an event, but actually seeing it happen right in front of you, that visceral impact can be really powerful, especially when it comes to shaping public opinion on all these complicated global issues.
Oh, absolutely. A good video can make you feel things like
Wow.
empathy, anger. It could even push you to do something in a way that words or just audio can't always do.
Yeah.
And since YouTube's so easy to get to, those videos can spread to a global audience super fast.
Exactly. And that's why it's become this like key battleground for shaping the narrative, especially in situations where traditional media just like can't get in, or where there are all these different sides telling different stories.
Yeah, like we saw during the Arab Spring, right? With citizen journalists using YouTube to show the protests and how the government was cracking down. But it's even more obvious in recent conflicts, like what's happening in Ukraine.
Oh, definitely. The Russia-Ukraine war has really shown how much influence YouTube has on how the world sees the conflict. Both sides have been using it a ton to like spread their version of events, often with these really slick videos that make it hard to tell what's propaganda and what's real news.
It's almost like a new kind of information war, where controlling the story is just as important as, controlling the actual fighting.
Exactly. And the challenge for people watching is to figure out what's real,
Mm-hmm.
especially when the information's coming from sources they don't really know. This is where critical media literacy, being able to really analyze what you're seeing, becomes super important.
Okay, so how do we handle this whole new world of information? How can we teach ourselves and others to be more, I don't know, savvy about what we're consuming online, especially on platforms like YouTube?
Well, I think one key thing is to look for multiple perspectives on the same event. Don't just rely on one source, even if it seems legit. Try to find coverage from lots of different places, like international news, independent journalists, even those citizen journalists who are right there in the thick of it.
Yeah, makes sense. The more viewpoints you get, the better equipped you are to form your own opinion, right?
Exactly. And really pay attention to the sources themselves, like who's creating this content, what's their agenda, are they upfront about their funding and how they do things? These are all really important questions to ask.
Sounds like we almost need to become like detectives, digging deep and trying to figure out what's behind the information we see.
Kind of, yeah. And we got to be aware of our own biases too, right? Like, what are our preconceived notions about this? Are we more likely to believe stuff that fits with what we already think? Being aware of those biases can help us be more critical and objective when we're assessing information.
I mean, this is all great advice, but I have to admit, it can get pretty overwhelming. There's just so much information coming at us all the time. How do we even know where to start?
It's a real challenge, no doubt. And this is where things like education and media literacy are so crucial. We have to give people the skills and knowledge to deal with this incredibly complex information landscape.
So it's not just about taking personal responsibility, it's about systemic change too, right? Like teaching these skills in schools, community centers, even public awareness campaigns.
Oh, absolutely. And we need to be having these conversations as a society, talking about the role of social media in our lives, the power it has to shape how we see things, and the responsibility that comes along with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how those platforms themselves are handling all this.
Yeah.
We've seen some attempts at self-regulation like Facebook and Twitter, trying to flag or remove stuff that's misinformation or hate speech,
Yeah.
but it's clearly a constant struggle.
Yeah, and those efforts Well, they haven't always been successful. There's a lot of debate about how effectively these platforms can police themselves and whether they're really doing enough to combat the spread of harmful content.
And then there's the whole question of like government regulation, which brings a whole other set of issues to the table.
Right. There's a lot to think about when it comes to regulating social media. On the one hand, you have concerns about censorship, the potential for governments to use regulation to silence dissent or control the flow of information.
Right. But then there's also the need to protect people from the harm that can come from all this misinformation, hate speech, all the online abuse. It's a tough balance to strike.
It really is. And there's no easy answer. Different countries are taking different approaches, and this is a debate that's likely to continue for quite a while.
One thing that seems pretty clear, though, is that we can't just rely on these social media companies to regulate themselves. There needs to be some accountability, whether it comes from government regulation, industry standards, or some combination of both.
I agree. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just a tech issue, it's a societal issue. How we use social media, how we consume information, how we interact online, all of these things contribute to how social media shapes our understanding of the world.
So it's not just about fixing algorithms or making new rules. It's about changing our own behavior and creating a more informed, more critical, and more responsible online culture.
Exactly. It's about realizing that we all have a part to play in shaping the future of social media and making sure it's a force for good.
It feels like, we've been kind of focused on the downsides and challenges of social media's influence on global politics. But in all of this, are there any like bright spots? Are there examples of how social media is being used in a good way, ethically, to deal with these complicated global issues?
Oh, for sure, there are. It's easy to get caught up in all the negative stuff, but there are a lot of people and groups out there using social media to do some real good.
Right.
One area where we're seeing like real progress is in humanitarian aid and disaster relief.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when a crisis hits, being able to share information quickly and get resources where they need to go can literally save lives.
Exactly. Think about the recent earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Social media platforms became like these vital tools for coordinating rescues, helping people find loved ones who are missing, and raising awareness to bring in international aid. The speed and reach of those platforms were really crucial in making the response bigger and faster.
It's almost like social media becomes this like global nervous system when something like that happens, connecting people and resources across borders.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just limited to like immediate crisis response. We're also seeing social media being used to tackle those long-term global problems like poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Right. I can see how that power to connect and mobilize people could be really effective in those areas. Are there like any specific examples that come to mind?
Oh, absolutely. Organizations like the UN and Amnesty International have been using social media to engage a global audience on these issues. They're using those platforms to share stories, connect with donors, recruit volunteers, and push for policy changes.
It's interesting how they can like bypass the traditional gatekeepers and speak directly to a global audience. It lets them build communities of support around these causes, even if those causes aren't getting much attention from like mainstream media.
Yeah, exactly. It's giving power to grassroots groups and individuals who are working on the ground. And we're even seeing social media being used to hold powerful institutions accountable, expose human rights abuses, and document injustices happening in like remote parts of the world.
Wow, that's incredible. Are there any specific cases you're thinking of?
Well, the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar and the conflict in Yemen are good examples. Social media has given individuals and activists a way to share their stories, connect with journalists, and raise global awareness, often when traditional media can't even get into those regions.
So it's not just about sharing feel-good stories or raising money. It's about giving a voice to people who were often silenced,
Yeah.
giving them a platform to demand justice and accountability.
Exactly. It's about using technology to amplify the voices of those who need to be heard and holding those in power responsible for what they do.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential for good, but we also need to like be real about the limitations. Social media can't solve these complicated global problems on its own, right?
You're absolutely right. It's not a magic solution. Social media can raise awareness, get people involved, and put pressure on decision makers. But it can't replace the hard work of diplomacy, negotiation, and finding real, sustainable solutions on the ground.
So it's about using social media strategically along with other forms of activism and engagement.
Exactly. It's about amplifying the voices and movements that are working to make a real difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing to remember is that social media is just a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's up to us as individuals and as a global community to decide how we want to use it. We have to be critical of the information we see, aware of our own biases, and willing to have thoughtful conversations even when those conversations are tough.
Yeah, we can't just sit back and watch. We need to actively participate in shaping what happens online, making sure social media is a force for good in the world.
Well said. The future of social media and its impact on global politics is really in our hands.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
Oh.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of social media and global politics. Until next time.